On this day, 1996, the New York Yankees beat the Atlanta Braves to win the 23rd championship in franchise history.
Into center field. That will put the Yankees on top. It's over the head of Grissom. O'Neill scores. Girardi is chugging for three. It's an RBI triple, and the Yankees lead by one. Base hit, 2-0 New York. Bernie Williams at the plate. Into right center, base hit. Here comes Jeter. The throw is no good. 3-0 New York.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for taking this early Saturday evening drive with me here in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So, sadly, the New York Yankees lost a pretty brutal baseball game last night, the first game of the 2024 World Series. It was a great baseball game, good pitching, some clutch hits, namely Giancarlo Stanton of the Yankees. There was some weird defensive plays, some questionable decision-making by the there's only two managers. Dave Roberts, did he leave the starter in too long? Did Aaron Boone mismanage the bullpen? Let me tell you something. It's loser's lament. Whenever you lose, there's always a second guess, maybe a third guess. But you have to ask yourself, what were you calling for when the move was made? Now, there have been plenty of times in my rooting career where I felt the manager fucked up in real time, or I'm screaming to the television set, don't pitch to this guy, intentionally walk him, 3-run homer. Shit happens. But sometimes you just get caught, and no matter what you do, despite your best efforts, and despite doing everything the way that I would have done it, doesn't work out. So the Yankees dropped a pretty vicious game one, but it's baseball. It's a 7-game series. If this were a 3-game series, they'd really be up shit's creek because then they got to win 2 in a row. But now you go out there, you try to win a game tonight, you have an off day tomorrow to travel, and then you got 3 in the Bronx, and you just go from there. You forget it quickly. Look, the Cleveland series, the Yankees game 3 was a horrendous loss, way worse than last night. Well, it's not even close. Now, if you want to say, well, the World Series is more important, right. But I'm just talking about the mechanics of baseball. You're in a championship series. You're about to go up 3-0. You're up by 2 runs with a 2-run lead and no one on base and 2 out. You are 98.9% to win that game. You can't lose that game. They lost, but they won the next 2 to win the series. They didn't even have to go back to New York. So we'll see what happens. But on a more hopeful, positive, memorable, single greatest New York Yankee fan memory of my lifetime, 28 years ago tonight, on October 26th, 1996, the New York Yankees defeated the Atlanta Braves in the Bronx to win the 1996 World Series. Now, out of context, if you're a younger fan that maybe knows a little bit of the history, you hear the year 96, maybe you say, was Derek Jeter playing? Was he a rookie? Bernie Williams, was he maybe he was in his prime, whatever it might be. Did Mariano, was he there? The 1996 Yankees, it is certainly the best fan season of my lifetime because of how the season played out, because they hadn't been to a World Series in 15 years. There was, to some extent, we were still pissed off about the strike in 94 where the Yankees were in first place when the season ended. And then they had the big rally late in 95 and made the playoffs, but they ended up losing that incredible series to Seattle anyway, and Mattingly retired. But 96 was Derek Jeter's rookie year. It was Mariano Rivera's rookie year, although Rivera pitched very well toward the stretch run of 1995 and in the postseason against Seattle. He basically was their best pitcher. And Buck Showalter, unfortunately, didn't quite realize what he had. Probably cost him the series. He knew what Rivera would become. He absolutely would have deployed him differently because John Wetland, who was really good. He just didn't have it in that series. Every time Wetland pitched, he just got killed. But that's neither here nor there. The 1996 Yankees went out. They came out of the gate firing, and they were pretty much running away with the American League East. Now, the last time that a New York Yankee team ran away with a division and won a division, you got to go all the way back to 1977. I mean, because they didn't run away with anything in 78. I mean, I guess 1980, but 1980 was a weird year. They didn't run away with the division. There were 3 teams in the American League East that won 100 games. You want to talk about a strong year for the AL East? You had the Yankees and the Orioles, and I believe the Milwaukee Brewers cracking the 100 mark. I mean, get the fuck out of here. How's that even possible? But the 96 Yankees ran away and seemingly hid. And then they fell apart. This was a team that looked like it was going to get to 100 wins, or at least challenge the 100-win mark for the first time since 1980, where I think they ended at 103-59. And with that, I was at the game that they clinched in 1980. Reggie Jackson hit a 3-run homer off a pitcher named Roger Weaver. No relation to Jeff or Jared Weaver, but Roger Weaver, and Reggie hit just a moonshot into the right field upper deck. But there's 3 games left in the season. They end up winning 103, and they still hadn't clinched. That's how tight it was that year. The 96 Yankees, Jeter had a huge season. Mariano actually challenged for the Cy Young Award. David Cohn looked terrific. Andy Pettitte was challenging for the Cy Young Award. Wetland was solid as a closer. They just had it. Mariano Duncan had a big year. O'Neill was great. Tino Martinez in his first year with the Yankees, he had a big season. They had all of these things going their way, and they collapsed in August and nearly coughed up all of a 12.5 or 13 game lead in the last month of the season. And they just barely held on. It was one of those where with a week in the season, they needed to win a game against Boston, and they had a crazy win in extra innings in the Bronx against Boston. Derek Jeter was like a 13-11 game or something crazy like that. And in the postseason, they only won 92 games. There have been Yankee teams over history that have won a lot more than 92 games and went home because there were not all these layers of playoffs. You won your division or you went home. But 96 Yankees, they won the division. And they beat the Texas Rangers in a very tough series. They lost game 1 at the stadium, best out of 5, and they were down 4-1 in the 6th inning of game 2. They were very, very close to being in enormous 0-2, got to win 3 in a row, and 2 of them in Texas. Like, they were almost just about doomed. But they got through that. They won the series with Texas, and obviously the Baltimore Orioles series, the Jeffrey Mayer in the first game, you know, the Yankee luck, Yankee magic, whatever you want to call it. But I remember the first game of the World Series in 96 was on a Sunday night. And this was right smack dab in the middle of my professional blackjack period. And I was in Atlantic City. I went with my mom and her boyfriend to Atlantic City to the good old Tropicana. And we were going to watch game 1 of the World Series in Atlantic City. Yeah, because I was getting free rooms and meals and everything. So the trip was basically all comped. And it was the first World Series game at Yankee Stadium in 15 years. And even though the Braves were a superior team, and Braves won 105, 106 games, they were just tremendous. They had won the World Series the previous year. They beat a stacked Cleveland Indians team. The Cleveland Indians were 144. They were a dominant team. You had Albert Bell hit 50 home runs in 144 games. Man, he was a one-man wrecking crew. Bell was a dominant player. Manny Ramirez was getting his career going, and we know all about Manny Ramirez, was practically a cheat code. And Carlos Baerga was still in his prime. They had so many great players on that Indians team. They had the big pitchers, even Dennis Martinez. Charles Nagy was terrific. Braves won the 95 World Series. And then the Yankees, we were hoping, the St. Louis Cardinals actually had a 3-1 lead against the Braves, and we were hoping against hope that the Cardinals would find a way to win one more game. But the Braves pretty much beat the shit out of them in games 5, 6, and 7. I don't know that any of those games were even competitive. So game 1 of the World Series, October I think it was October 20th of 1996. I'm in Atlantic City, and I'm in the hotel room. Now, bear in mind, I was there to play blackjack. Maybe I would watch the game, but it's insane. I was the guy who used to watch every pitch of every single game when the team lost 95 games. I'm still watching the game at 2 a.m. when they're on the West Coast. They're 25 games under 500, and I am living and dying with every pitch. That was the kind of fan I was. But here in Atlantic City, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. But in the hotel room, my mom and her guy, they're downstairs getting some food, whatever it was. And I watch first inning. And at the top of the first, Pettit doesn't really look that sharp, but the Braves don't score. And the Yankees come up in the first inning, and they get 2 on and 2 out for Cecil Fielder against John Smoltz, who won the Cy Young that year. I believe he was 24-8, which is a lot of decisions for a 5-man rotation. I don't know how he had that many decisions. I think he was 24-8. But Smoltz actually pitched better than Greg Maddux and Tom Glavine that year, and a one-time 20-game winner, Steve Avery. They just had an insane rotation. Maddux was still great, but he hadn't pitched quite up to his capabilities that year, hence why Smoltz opened the World Series. But with the score tied, 2 on and 2 out, Cecil Fielder got into one, and when he hit the ball, it looked like a 3-run homer in the right center field bleachers. And already, I'm imagining the Yankees winning this game when Cecil hit that ball, because Cecil had just crazy power to all fields. This was a guy who was the first man to hit 50 home runs in 13 years? He had huge power. Cecil hit what looked like a 3-run homer. Andrew Jones, I think it was Andrew Jones. It could have been Marquise Grissom, but one of the outfielders caught it in front of the wall. I could not believe that ball didn't go. And then Andy Pettit got beat up. He got beat up. And I think the Braves got 3 runs in the top of the second. And I made a decision for the first time. You know what? I'm going to go play some blackjack. I don't really want to suffer through this. I was already had that mentality that I didn't want to have 3.5 hours of torture. The Yankees lost that game 12-1. And then they went out the next night, which was a Monday night, and I actually had school, and I'll never forget getting into the car. I had a class that went till 9:30. There's no social media. I didn't have a cell phone for texting in 1996. I had no idea what was going on with the game while I watched, I think it was 2001: A Space Odyssey, I think was the movie that I saw in the big Schimmel Auditorium in the Stern School of Business, where we had one of the film classes that semester. And I remember getting into the car before game 2, crossing my fingers. I have no idea what's going on, 10 miles from where I was, because I was in Lower Manhattan, the Bronx, probably not even 10 miles by distance. And I got in the car, and I knew it was going to be late in the game, and the dulcet tones, the beautiful tones of John Sterling, a lot younger. He's doing the games now. He was retired. They brought him back for the World Series for sure, and I think he did the Championship Series too. The first words I heard when I turned the radio on: boy, do the Yankees ever need David Cone in Game 3. And I instantly translated that, we're fucked. And sure enough, the Yanks were down 4-0. Greg Maddux was Greg Maddux. He pitched his classic, doesn't walk anybody, doesn't break any bats, but he gets 10 ground balls and 5 tappers to the mound. I can't imagine how frustrating it must have been to hit against that guy. Yeah, he would get his strikeouts, but generally speaking, you swung yourself into the ground and you hit pop-ups and you hit dribblers and you hit nice fly balls, cans of corn to center field or left field or right field. So the Yankees dropped the first 2. And the sense the series was over. I mean, they were even joking around. Mad Dog Russo on WFAN, Russ Salzberg and Steve Summers, they said they should stop the series now. This is embarrassing. Braves in 3. And all kinds of jokes. Yankee haters and Met fans were having a field day, and it was hard to blame them, because here we had this big head of steam after the series with Baltimore, and it looked like the Braves weren't even going to make the World Series, and now we're down 2-0, and we're about to go to Fulton County Stadium and get the shit kicked out of us in Game 3, and we're going to get swept. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to the Braves sweeping the Yankees. The Yankees won a very competitive Game 3. Bernie Williams had a huge home run late to put the game more or less out of reach. Then they won that crazy Game 4 one of the best games in the history of the World Series, especially on the road. The Yanks were down 6-0, and they ended up winning the game. They had a huge rally, and then they had another rally, and they won the game in extra innings. And in Game 5, Andy Pettitte beat John Smoltz 1-0, a rematch of Game 1, but now you got the pitcher's duel you were expecting in the first game. So the off day, which would have been yesterday, 28 years ago, Joe Torre's brother, Frank, got a heart transplant, a man who had died tragically from the Bronx. And Frank Torre got not an artificial heart, he got a new heart, and that was on the off day. And in Game 6, the excitement level, because I had not experienced this, I wasn't old enough to really, I didn't know anything. I was 4 years old in 1978, and my dad stuck me in front of the TV. I don't really know what the hell I was looking at. And in 1981 World Series, they lost. I watched the day games, but they lost those too. That was the worst World Series ever. The Yanks won the first 2 games at the stadium, had leads in all 3 games in Los Angeles, lost all 3, had a lead in Game 6, lost that too. George Frazier, a record that'll never be broken. He lost 3 games in 1 World Series. How the hell do you do that? He didn't even pitch that bad. I remember my dad saying they beat him with a bunch of broken bad hits and grounders. It's not like he got smashed. But the excitement in the pre-social media era, the excitement heading into Game 6, the miracle of the Yankees winning all 3 games in Atlanta. I mean, statistically speaking, the Braves were probably 80 to 85% to win the series before the series started. I think that's fair, because they did win 14 or 15 games more than the Yanks in the regular season, and they did have the big pitchers. They had 3 pitchers better than, by statistics, I don't know that they were better than Andy Pettitte, but in terms of ERA and stuff like that, pitchers WAR, they had 3 guys who were better than our best guy. But the Yankees somehow surmounted. Down 2-0 was like 95% or more that the Braves were going to win the series. And the Yanks win all 3 in Atlanta. And brutal losses for the Braves. And the sense was the Yanks were going to win it in 6, even though they were facing Maddox. And Jimmy Key really hadn't looked that great in the postseason. You didn't know what's going to happen. He didn't pitch well. He got hit hard in Game 2, the Maddox game. But there was an idea. We're going to win. We're going to win. Now, here's the historical personal footnote. This is a true story. So my dear old dad, Alan Philip Cohen, the biggest Yankee fan I've ever known, may he rest in eternal cinematic and Yankee fandom paradise. My dad was, he was a CPA, as most of you know. And his company, they owned a piece of a season ticket plan. This is so ridiculous, but this is exactly what happened. They owned a piece of a season ticket plan, and they were seats that now in the regular season are like $1,500 a pop. The seats were about 30 feet up the first baseline, and I think it was either 5 or 6 rows back. You're talking champion suites, what it's called now. So before the postseason, the owner of this particular season ticket plan, the partners at SCF & Co., there were 5 of them. Each of them got the choice of a ticket. Well, 2 tickets to be precise. Now, if you wanted to guarantee that you were going to go to a playoff game, you better pick either Game 1 or 2 in a 1996 American League Division Series. 2 of the partners one guy chose Game 1, and one guy chose Game 2. They got to go to those games. The late, great Mike First and Harold Shulman, who is, believe it or not, still working a partial schedule. He's well into his 80s. It's just unbelievable. Hal took Game 1. That was the Jeffrey Mayer game. Hal got to see it right up close. I think the seats, I'm not sure if the seats were by the foul pole that night or if he was sitting in the ridiculous seats, that I mentioned, 30 feet up the first baseline, 5th or 6th row back. But Hal Shulman got to watch the Jeffrey Mayer game in person. And then Mike First went to Game 2, which the Yankees ended up losing. Now, my dad, not a gambler, he was a very careful, cautious personality. He lived his entire life like that. But he decided, because it was offered, the guys that owned the box seats said, we can give you 2 seats to Game 1 of the ALDS, Game 2 of the ALDS. games 1 or 2 of the ALCS or game 6. They wouldn't give us game 7. Or you can take game 7 of the World Series in those seats. My dad rolled the dice. This was before the postseason. This was a couple of days before the series with Texas was to begin. Dad rolled the dice and said, I want game 7. I want game 7 of the World Series in those seats. So imagine, Dad and I didn't get to watch this game together, by the way. I went to my mother's house. My father was actually away. He was visiting his lady friend, and he watched it by her. So that's a rare game. That was an enormous game that he and I didn't watch together. I ended up watching with my mom, who's not really a baseball fan. My sister was there. She wasn't at the time really a fan. And my mom's boyfriend, who was a Met fan, he fucking hated the Yankees. So it's kind of added to the humor of the night. But my father said until his last day, he was torn about that night. Yes, he wanted the Yankees to win the World Series, of course. But really what he would have wanted was for them to win the World Series in 7. If he'd had a guarantee, because he wanted to go to game 7 of the World Series with his son, sitting in those seats. And I guess if you want to say the level of flex that it would have been for him, my dad was, 53, 54 at the time. He didn't really usually, at least outwardly, think that way. He didn't say that to me. But I like to believe, because he was somebody who worked so hard and was super successful in his way, within normal parameters, that he would have nobody did him a favor to get him those seats. SCF and Co. got those tickets, and they were able to kind of show off for clients, and it helped them to grow their business because they looked like ballers, and from a certain point of view, they were. But Dad wanted to go to that game. He wanted to say that he went to that game. He hadn't been to a World Series game, I don't think, since 1961. He went to some playoff games. I was at game 3 of the 76, the series with Chambliss. I was at the game 2 days earlier. The Yankees won. The next night was the infamous the Bronx is burning. And then the following night, Chambliss hit the famous home run and 10,000 people ran onto the field. But he didn't go to any World Series games in 77 or 78 or 81. From my perspective, I just wanted them to win. Not that I didn't care about going to the game the following night, but I was imagining a scenario where the Yankees would lose a tough game. I figured it was going to be a tight game. I wasn't expecting another blowout like, the first 2 games really were not in doubt after, the third or fourth inning. But I was 100%, I wanted the Yankees to win the game. I wasn't willing to fuck around because you get to a game 7. What if the Braves score 7 runs at the top of the first? No. Win the game. There was not the slightest hint of, well, at least if we lose, we've got game 7. No, at least if we lose, we've got game 7. But I was not. There was no conflict. That Darth Vader, there is no conflict. There was no conflict. For my father, there was a little bit. It was 10% of him he wasn't exactly rooting for them to lose, but he was more conflicted than I was. That is a true statement. So the Yankees went out against Maddox, who they did nothing against in the second game. Maddox had them so handcuffed, it looked like he could have pitched all night. He got the first couple of innings. He got through the first few innings. And the Yankees put together the kind of rally that you rarely saw of that era, Greg Maddux, which is they put a couple of hits together, and Joe Girardi, you hate to say it, Marquise Grissom was playing Little League depth in center field, and Girardi hit a ball over Marquise Grissom's head. The Yanks had a runner on third with 1 out, and he just hit the ball over Grissom's head. It was ridiculous. It was the kind of ball that if Grissom is playing normal depth, he might, because he was a good outfielder, he might be able to track it down. So he hits a triple. Bernie Williams didn't really have much of a series, but every hit he had was a huge hit. I think he only had 4 hits, but he had a hit to knock in the first run in game 3. Then he had the home run to put game 3 away. And then he had a big hit to knock in the second run in this particular game 6. So the Yanks got 3 runs. I think it was the 4th inning. It was either the 3rd or the 4th inning. And then the Braves put up 2. And actually, I believe had first and second 1 out, or first and third, or bases loaded. And Terry Pendleton, who was a terrific player, was kind of come to the end, hit into a double play. and the score stayed 3-2. The Yankees had some kind of hold the fort relievers, guys like David Weathers, Graham Lloyd, who did a terrific job in those playoffs. And Graham Lloyd had been a late season pickup, and he had pitched terribly, but he was gold. He was money in the postseason. That's why a guy like Graham Lloyd will always be cheered at Old Timers Day, because people remember him in 96, and they also remember in 1998, after Tino Martinez got beaten by Armando Benitez, Graham Lloyd chased Benitez down, and he was throwing these crazy roundhouse haymaker punches. He didn't land anything, but just the image of him swinging, just throwing these wide, like George Foreman style, punches they used to make fun of him for. But the hold the fort relievers got the Yankees through 6 with the same 3-2 lead, and there was the sense that we were going to win the game, because we knew what it meant. A fully rested Mariano Rivera was going to come out for the 7th, and he was going to come out for the 7th and the 8th. And the formula from that season, the Yanks only lost 2 games the whole year where they led after 6. That is a stat that is impossible, but that's a stat. They lost 2 games all season when they led after 6. So Mariano went out there, and true to form, he froze them for 2 innings. I want to say he struck out 4, but he may have struck out 5. Now, Mariano didn't know the career he was going to then have. How could he? When he struck whoever it was out to end the 8th inning, it felt like it took him a minute to come off the mound. He walked so slowly off that mound, soaking in the moment, soaking in the adoration of the fans, because who knows what's going to happen in the 9th inning. Well, what happened in the 9th inning, I'm sorry, the score was 3-1, not 3-2. The final score was 3-2. The Braves only got 1 run, and then Pendleton hit into the double play in what I believe was the 4th inning. So, in the top of the 9th, with 2 outs and 2 on, Marquise Grissom hit a single, just shot a ball through the right side to make it a 3-2 game. And the Braves had the tying and winning runs on base, and John Wetland struck out Luis Polonia, and he got Mark Lemke. Mark Lemke, whose nickname was Little October, he had had a huge World Series the previous year against Cleveland and a big postseason in general, hence his nickname Little October. Lemke hit a foul pop with 2 outs that Charlie Hayes, who was the third baseman that night, he was a much better fielder than Wade Boggs, who was the other third baseman. Charlie Hayes kind of stumbled and staggered, and the ball went in the dugout, but honestly, Hayes had a play. If he had been able to set his feet properly near the dugout, I believe that he would have caught the ball. The World Series would have ended right there. But instead, Lemke got another chance with 2 on and 2 out. And I believe it was a full count. He could have walked him, and then the winning run is at second, and you start going through a lot of possibilities, and they're all bad. On the second 3-2 pitch, Lemke hit another pop-up to more or less the same spot. And I'll never forget watching this. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. You watch enough baseball and you understand there are certain movements, motions, there are certain things that players do that are signifiers. And one thing that is a kind of universal signifier in baseball is if a fielder, could be an outfielder, infielder, has a ball lined up, is going to make a catch, oftentimes the fielder will tap his glove. He'll tap his glove. He'll go like this to tap his glove. It's a normal thing. And it isn't something that I necessarily was preoccupied with or paid any attention to. But when Mark Lemke sent the second pop-up to roughly the same area as the first one, Hayes went over to the dugout the exact same way that he had done on Lemke's previous foul pop, which landed in the dugout. Hayes was lucky he didn't get hurt. He could have stumbled into the dugout, broken his ankle or something. But when Hayes went over towards the line and towards the dugout, he stopped moving just before he got to the dugout. And Derek Jeter was standing there, and Hayes did something before catching the ball. He punched his glove. And when he punched his glove, if you watch the video, Derek Jeter starts to celebrate before Hayes catches it. He had the exact same reaction as me. When a fielder hits his glove, he ain't dropping it. He ain't missing it. He's making a catch. And Derek started to celebrate, and I started jumping and screaming. I screamed the phrase, "He's got it," at the top of my lungs. He caught the ball, and that was the end of the World Series. And bedlam. You talk about a cliche, but it was bedlam in the Bronx. That is the single greatest moment that any sports fan can experience. And as much as, I joke around with the Mets, and I had, decades where I actively despised and rooted against the Mets every pitch of every game, that kind of thing. But every sports fan who has not should experience and have the opportunity to experience the unfettered joy of that. A game for the World Series or the NBA championship, the NHL, the NFL, the Super Bowl, where you're like a kid again. And it is pure happiness and pure joy. And whatever other things are going on in your life, whatever problems you have, we all have them, you forget about them. And you just soak in the moment and the ecstasy, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, the ecstasy of winning a World Series, of winning a Super Bowl, of winning a Stanley Cup, of winning a Naismith Trophy, whatever it is. October 26th, 1996, 28 years ago tonight, the New York Yankees won the 23rd championship in the history of the greatest franchise ever to exist in professional sports. This has been episode 341 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday evening with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace out and go Yankees.